Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to explore a genuinely fascinating academic white paper by Dr. Bichara Sahely. It's called Life-Coherent Financing, Reclaiming Finance in Service of Life, and it fundamentally reframes how we view money, debt, and the entire economy. If you've ever looked around and felt like our economic systems were somehow completely detached from the actual everyday reality of human well-being and planetary health, well, you definitely aren't alone. This paper gives us a totally new framework to understand exactly why that's happening and, far more importantly, how we might actually go about fixing it.
Okay, so let's dive right into this by shattering a massive, widely held myth. It's the idea that money was just invented as this neutral mathematical tool because, let's face it, lugging a cow to the market to trade for wheat simply got too heavy. We have absolutely all heard that story, right? The barter myth basically suggests that money is just a convenient medium of exchange, completely devoid of any deep moral or social weight. But as it turns out, historical and anthropological evidence tells a very, very different story. Long before money was a physical coin you could actually hold in your pocket, the paper argues that it was fundamentally a social relation. Instead of just a sterile exchange of goods, it was a way for communities to remember reciprocity, keep track of shared obligations, and really maintain trust among neighbors. So while the standard myth completely strips money of its humanity, the historical reality grounds money deeply in community. Money is, and according to this research, always has been a way of keeping score of our relationships.
Section 1, the myth of neutral money. So we have to start by understanding that finance is far from a neutral, passive subsystem. Once we stop seeing money as just a tool, we can start to see it as an active, world-shaping force. The paper maps finance not as a vacuum, but as a civilizational grammar. Think of it basically as the operating system that dictates how a society functions. When it's healthy, it acts like a circulatory system for trust and care. It remains deeply connected to the actual living ground it supports, it stays constrained by ecology, and it's heavily oriented toward future generations. According to Dr. Sahely, through finance, societies literally decide what futures get funded, what harms are discounted, and what kinds of life are allowed to flourish or fail. It tells us who is creditworthy, what counts as a cost, and whose future is actually believable. It is not just math. The author posits that it is literally the blueprint of our civilization's future.
Section 2, the drift to extraction.
So how exactly did we get from mutual trust to the highly extractive system we experience today? Historically, money drifted away from that relational memory we just talked about and mutated into autonomous, self-serving power. The author traces how shared community obligations transformed into institutionalized debt, and eventually that became a system completely detached from the living communities it was originally supposed to serve. Today, that looks like asset inflation, offshore tax havens, and shadow banking. We can trace this abstraction across time, witnessing a sort of four-stage drift. Millennia ago, social obligation hardened into enforceable debt. Fast forward a few centuries, and that credit became a compounding claim, which meant it could grow automatically. In recent decades, this morphed into heavy financialization, leading us directly to today, where money increasingly functions as programmable command through digital currencies. At every single step, finance has become vastly more powerful and, frankly, far less accountable to daily life. And here is the absolute core conflict. Compound interest creates this terrifying temporal asymmetry. Money can grow forever, but human and ecological life simply cannot. Think about it. Life capacity, our biology, our ecosystems, our human energy, it grows within strict natural bounds. It needs rest, it needs nutrients, it needs time. Claim power, however, which is driven by compound interest, can grow exponentially forever on a spreadsheet. Human and ecological life literally cannot keep up with those compounding mathematical demands without eventually breaking down.
Section 3, the great financial inversion. This friction brings us to a devastating turning point, which is identified in the text through the work of philosopher John McMurtry. The paper highlights the great inversion. This is the exact moment society starts sacrificing living systems, our health, care, and ecology, to serve the self-expansion of money. So instead of asking how our financial systems can support healthy communities and ecosystems, the paper argues we start asking how our communities can be squeezed and harvested to support the financial system. We are effectively sacrificing the real world to feed a spreadsheet.
And this leads directly to what is called the creditor's illusion. This is a really dangerous illusion, and it's exactly why you might see a booming stock market or rising GDP on the evening news, but still feel completely exhausted, anxious, and financially depleted in your own daily life. We look at those rising numbers and we think society is wealthy, completely ignoring the fact that the living ground, our caregivers, our workers, our environment is burning out just to produce those returns.
Section 4. Finance as Invisible Violence.
Drawing on sociologist Johan Galtung's work, the paper really challenges us to expand our definition of what harm actually looks like in a modern financialized world. We usually think of violence as physical, right? But if a hospital is underfunded because a nation is forced to prioritize foreign debt payments over public health, the resulting loss of life isn't just some natural tragedy. It's structural violence. It's avoidable harm built into social arrangements and engineered by financial rules.
Everyday financial mechanisms can enforce avoidable scarcity across our lives without ever firing a single shot. Just look at housing. The financialization of shelter leads directly to displacement and homelessness. In ecology, carbon market extraction results in severe climate underinvestment. And in care, excluding unpaid labor from financial models leads to profound exhaustion for families everywhere. The violence is quiet, it is legal, and it is entirely systemic.
Section 5. The Life-Coherent Test.
So how do we actually diagnose this structural violence and finally course correct? Well, to fix this, Dr. Sahely proposes the Life-Coherent principle. This is the ultimate rule, and it suggests stripping legitimacy from any debt or claim that destroys the living ground it depends on. It reasserts that life is the primary value, and money is simply the servant of that life. Under this framework, if an obligation requires you to destroy your health or your environment to pay it back, that obligation is fundamentally illegitimate.
Applying this diagnostic test completely shifts our perspective. It forces us to prioritize living continuity over abstract financial accumulation. And it basically breaks down into a practical three-step process. First, what is the actual living capacity of the debtor? Second, is the risk being shared fairly between the creditor and the debtor, finally putting an end to privatizing gains and socializing losses? And third, does the financial claim actually preserve our future options rather than extracting them?
Section 6. Reclaiming Finance for Life. Now that we actually understand the illness, the white paper outlines some incredibly concrete, hopeful pathways to re-embed finance back into the living world. Just imagine a system that offers targeted debt relief when communities are simply overwhelmed and claims exceed their life capacity. Imagine utilizing public banking explicitly directed at absolute necessities like health, housing, and care. Picture implementing ecological budgets that respect biophysical limits, enforcing real tax justice to stop wealth from hiding offshore, and building rights-based digital money that serves the public rather than just tracking them.
You see, the overarching goal of the paper isn't to abolish money or romanticize the past. It's about actively healing finance, transforming it back into a circulatory system of trust and care. It's about creating a reality where the tree of life is nourished by the flow of resources, not uprooted by it. Finance really should be the water that helps society grow, not the blade that cuts it down.
The author leaves us with such a critical reminder here. Finance is simply a human institution. Because we built the financial system, we literally have the power to redesign it. The paper argues that the ultimate metric of a healthy economy isn't how much capital has multiplied on a spreadsheet, but how much human dignity, ecological stability, and community resilience we have actually managed to preserve and enable.
I'm going to leave you with this final provocative question, because the future we choose to fund today is the future we will ultimately have to live in tomorrow. What world is our money conserving right now? And more importantly, what beautiful, life-coherent world could it help us bring forth if we simply choose to align our wealth with our lives? Thank you so much for exploring this with me today.